They laughed. The sound wasn't cruel, not really. It was that light, airy, dismissive chuckle that teenagers master so perfectly, the kind that seems to float on the surface of a conversation without ever touching the depths of real feeling. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. It filled my bright, poster-plastered classroom on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a day that smelled of whiteboard markers, old paper, and the faint, damp wool scent of rain-soaked coats left to dry on the backs of chairs. I had just told them I was once homeless. And my advanced placement English class, my bright-eyed, college-bound seniors who saw me only as Ms. Evans, the woman who lived and breathed Shakespeare, thesis statements, and the proper use of the semicolon, they found the idea not just surprising, but absurd. I stood there, my fingertips still resting on the worn, dog-eared cover of the Grapes of Wrath we had been discussing. I had used it as a bridge, a way to talk about the resilience of the human spirit in the face of profound loss and displacement. Steinbeck isn't just writing about the Dust Bowl, I'd said, my voice earnest, trying to connect the Depression-era dust to the existential dust that sometimes settles in our own modern lives. He's writing about the fragility of home. It's something you can carry inside you, a feeling of safety and belonging, but it's also a physical thing, a roof, a door you can lock, a place where you can breathe out. And when that's gone, it changes the very composition of your soul. It sands you down and rebuilds you into someone new, someone harder and more fragile all at once. I know. Because there was a time after my father left, when my mother and I lived in our car for almost 6 months. That's when the laughter started. A single, sharp snort from the back of the room, from where Jake usually sat doodling intricate robots in the margins of his notebook. Then a few stifled giggles from Sarah and her friend Lila, a wave of it rippling through the rows of desks like a sudden, unexpected breeze. Sarah, my star debater, the one who could dismantle an opponent's argument with surgical precision, covered her mouth, her eyes wide with a sort of apologetic horror, but still crinkled at the corners with irrepressible amusement. Sorry, Ms. Evans, she managed, her voice muffled by her hand. It's just, you're so put together. You're always talking about structured paragraphs and 5-year plans and having a backup plan for your backup plan. You don't seem like the type. The type. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and strangely shaped. What was the type? Ragged clothes? A perpetual look of despair? A certain kind of voice, a certain kind of walk? They couldn't reconcile the woman in the crisp, ironed blouse and tailored black slacks, the one with a color-coded lesson plan and a jar of perfectly sharpened pencils on her desk, with the girl I had once been. To them, homelessness was a distant, abstract tragedy, something that happened to other people in other, less fortunate worlds, not to their 42-year-old English teacher with a master's degree, a mortgage, and a reliable Honda Civic in the faculty parking lot. I was a pillar of their structured, predictable universe. I was stability incarnate. The idea that my foundation had ever been cracked, let alone completely shattered, was, to them, a narrative impossibility. Their laughter didn't hurt me, not in the way they might have feared it would. It was more of a dull, familiar ache, an echo from a past life. It was the sound of my own internal laughter 25 years earlier, a bitter, choked sound I would make through tears at the sheer, ridiculous impossibility of my situation. But their reaction did something else, too. It lit a small, stubborn flame in the very center of my chest. It was time. I had carried this story for so long, a silent, heavy stone in my pocket, its weight a constant companion. I had polished it in the dark until it was smooth, until it felt like a part of me. But maybe it was never meant to be a secret. Maybe it was always meant to be a lesson. A key. It's true, I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the last remnants of their dwindling laughter. The room fell silent, a sudden, thick quiet that was louder than the noise that had preceded it. They heard the shift in my tone, saw the uncharacteristic gravity in my eyes. I was no longer just leading a literature discussion, I was about to testify. It was the winter of my 16th year. The worst winter the city had seen in a decade, or at least that's how I remember it. The cold got into everything, into your bones, into the cracks of the pavement, into the very air you breathed. My father, he was a kind man, but a quiet one. The world weighed on him in a way I didn't understand until I was much older. He worked in a warehouse, loading trucks, and the work was backbreaking and the pay was meager. He just couldn't handle life anymore. The bills piling up like a wall in front of him, the constant pressure, the heavy, suffocating silence in our house after my grandmother passed away. He left a note on the kitchen table one Tuesday morning and was gone. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just a single, handwritten page filled with apologies and a love he couldn't seem to express when he was in the room with us. I walked around my desk, leaning against the front of it, closing the physical and emotional distance between us. I was no longer just their teacher, an authority figure separated by a slab of wood. I was a storyteller, and this was the most important story I would ever tell them. This was my grapes of wrath. My mother worked as a waitress at a 24-hour diner called the Blue Plate Special, a place that smelled perpetually of stale coffee, frying grease, and desperation. She was a small woman, my mother, but she had a spine of tempered steel. Without my father's income, though, even her steel began to bend. We were evicted from our tiny, two-bedroom apartment just 2 months after he left. The notice was taped to our door, a cold, impersonal piece of paper that felt like a death sentence. I remember standing there with her, reading it over and over, the words "vacate the premises" swimming in front of my eyes. My mother didn't cry. She just took a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders squaring, and said, "All right then. We'll manage." I looked out at their young, attentive faces, seeing the last vestiges of skepticism being replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Jake had stopped doodling, his pen frozen mid-robot arm. Sarah was leaning forward, her chin resting in her hands, her expression completely transformed. We sold what we could. My mother's good jewelry, a wedding gift from her own mother, a small television set, my father's collection of old vinyl records that he'd loved so much. The money we got was a pittance, but it was something. The rest of our lives, the detritus of 16 years, we stuffed into heavy, black trash bags. We didn't have boxes. Boxes implied a move, a transition to somewhere new. Trash bags felt more honest. We piled them into our old, rust-speckled Ford station wagon, the one with the fake wood paneling peeling off the sides. That car became our entire world. It was our bedroom, our kitchen, our living room, our storage unit. We parked in different spots every night, the far, dimly lit corners of 24-hour supermarket lots, the rest stops just off the highway where other nomadic souls gathered for a few hours of fitful sleep, sometimes in the dark, secluded corners of neighborhood parks where the trees offered a semblance of cover. We were always afraid. Afraid of the police knocking on the window, telling us to move on. Afraid of someone breaking in while we slept. But most of all, we were afraid of the cold. That deep, invasive cold that seeped through the metal of the car doors and the thin glass of the windows. I saw them imagining it. I saw them trying to picture themselves in that scenario, and I could see the struggle in their eyes. It was a reality too far removed from their own. My mother, I continued, my throat tightening with a familiar, old affection, she was a fortress. She'd go to her double shifts at the diner, coming back to the car smelling of grease and coffee and other people's conversations, her feet so swollen and aching she could barely take her shoes off. And she'd never once complain. Not to me. Her mantra, her prayer, was always, "This is temporary, Maya. This is not our life. This is just a chapter." At night, huddled under the mountain of coats and blankets we used as bedding, she'd click on the car's dome light, its weak, yellow glow a tiny island of warmth in the vast, dark car. She'd use that light to help me with my homework. She'd quiz me on biology terms or listen to me practice a speech for history class, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but never wavering from mine. She made me promise, every single night, that I would not drop out of school. "This car is not your life, Maya," she'd say, her voice fierce, a low whisper in the dark. "Your mind is your life. Your education is your life. And you are going to use it. You are going to use it to build yourself a house, a real house, with a foundation so strong, no storm, no man, no piece of bad luck, will ever be able to take it from you." I looked out at their young, attentive faces, so full of their own potential and their own, different kinds of fears. So I went to school. I wore the same 3 outfits on a careful, rotating schedule, praying no one would notice. I became an expert at using the school gym showers before anyone else arrived, my heart pounding the entire time, terrified of being discovered. I was always hungry, and always tired, a deep, bone-aching tiredness that no amount of sleep in a cramped car seat could ever fix, but I was there. My attendance was perfect. And I buried myself in books. Books were my escape, my refuge, my transportation out of that cold, fearful reality. Within their pages, I wasn't the girl who slept in a car and washed her hair in a public restroom sink. I was Elizabeth Bennet navigating the complexities of society and love. I was Jane Eyre finding her moral strength and independence. I was Scout Finch learning about justice and compassion in a world full of prejudice. Words became my bricks and mortar. Stories became my blueprints. I was already, without knowing it, building the house my mother had promised me. I paused, letting the image settle in the room. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound, a constant, low-level buzz that usually faded into the background but now felt like a heartbeat. But it was lonely. So lonely. I had friends, or at least, friendly acquaintances. I could talk about the latest episode of a TV show I'd never seen, I could discuss the math homework, I could laugh at a joke in the hallway. But I could never let them get too close. I built a fortress around my real life, with walls made of carefully constructed lies. I'd make elaborate excuses for why they could never come over to my house. My mother was sick, we were having renovations done, we had relatives visiting from out of town. I'd invent a busy, fictional home life to explain why I was always the last to leave the library, why I lingered in empty classrooms, why I sometimes seemed a million miles away. I felt like I was living in a glass box. I could see everyone else's normal, messy, wonderful lives happening all around me. I could hear their laughter and their arguments and their plans for the future, but I was unable to touch any of it, with this huge, shameful secret pressing in on me from all sides, threatening to shatter the glass at any moment. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the memory of that isolation as sharp and clear as if it were yesterday. And then, one day, everything changed. It was a Thursday. I remember because the cafeteria was serving its notoriously bad meatloaf, and the smell, a peculiar blend of ketchup and despair, seemed to have permeated every corner of the building. I was in the library, tucked away in my usual corral in the back, trying to concentrate on the witch's prophecies in Macbeth, but all I could think about was the fact that our station wagon had a slow-leaking flat tire and we didn't have the money to fix it. The dread was a physical weight on my chest. What if it went completely flat in the middle of the night? What if we got stranded? I must have looked as desperate as I felt, because the school librarian, Mrs. Gable, a wonderfully kind woman with kind eyes and reading spectacles that hung from a chain around her neck, came over and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Maya," she said softly, "is everything all right?" And I broke. The dam I had so carefully constructed over the past few months finally burst. The whole story, the car, the fear, the constant, gnawing hunger, the shame, it all just tumbled out in a hushed, tearful, incoherent torrent right there between the dusty shelves of classic literature. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile at the memory. Mrs. Gable didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or cry or shower me with pity. She just listened, her face soft and serious, her eyes never leaving mine. When I was finally done, spent and trembling, she patted my hand, her skin cool and papery against mine. "You wait right here, dear," she said. "Don't you move." She came back 10 minutes later, and she wasn't alone. She had a girl from the grade above me in tow. Her name was Chloe. And she was different from anyone I had ever met. She had this wild, untamable mane of dark, curly hair, there were faint, colorful paint stains on her jeans and under her fingernails, and she looked at me not with pity, or curiosity, but with a direct, unwavering, almost clinical assessment. I can still see Chloe so clearly in my mind's eye, a figure of salvation in paint-splattered sneakers. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry for you." She didn't offer empty platitudes. She looked me up and down, and then she said, "You sleep in a car? Wow. That's hardcore." A few of my students let out a small, surprised chuckle, the tension in the room easing slightly. She dragged me to the art room after school, I told them, the memory filling me with a familiar warmth. It was a chaotic, wonderful, glorious mess. There were half-finished pottery projects spinning lazily on wheels, canvases leaning against every wall splashed with bold, confident strokes of color, and the air was thick with the smells of turpentine, wet clay, and pure, unadulterated creativity. "This," Chloe announced, sweeping her arm in a grand gesture, "is my sanctuary. The only place in this entire school that makes any sense. And now it's yours, too." Her family wasn't rich, but they were stable, and they were kind in a way that felt solid and real. Her mother, Maria, was a force of nature. When Chloe went home and told her about me and my mom, Maria didn't hesitate. She didn't call social services first, she didn't debate the pros and cons. She got in her own beat-up sedan, drove to the 24-hour supermarket parking lot where we were parked that night, knocked firmly on our car window, and when my mother rolled it down, wary and afraid, Maria basically ordered us to come home with her. The memory was so vivid, so powerfully imbued with the feeling of rescue. She wouldn't take no for an answer. "You are not sleeping in a car in this weather," she said, her voice brooking no argument. It was a voice used to being listened to. You will sleep in a real bed tonight. You will eat a hot meal at a real table. This is not a discussion. It is a fact. So we went. We drove behind her, our old station wagon feeling even more shabby and pathetic following her sensible, clean car. We slept on their pull-out couch in the living room, buried under a mountain of handmade quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and fabric softener. It was the first deep, safe, untroubled sleep I'd had in months. That night was the beginning. Maria and Chloe, they became our family. They didn't solve all our problems with a magic wand, my mom still had to work relentlessly, we still had no home of our own to call our own, but they gave us a harbor. A place to land. They shared their food, their home, their laughter, their normal, everyday squabbles. They made us feel human again. They made us feel like we belonged somewhere. I looked at my students, their eyes wide with the unfolding drama of it all. Chloe and I, we became inseparable. She was the artist to my writer, the color to my words. She saw the world in shapes and hues and textures, and she taught me to see beyond the black and white of my own desperate situation. She was the one who, on the day I got my acceptance letter to college, made me look her in the eye and promise that if I ever got out, if I ever became a teacher like I dreamed, I would never forget what it felt like to be that scared, lonely girl in the library. She made me promise to use my story, not hide from it. Don't you dare let it become a dirty secret, Maya, she'd said, her face uncharacteristically serious. That story is your superpower. It's the thing that will let you see the kids everyone else looks right through. I straightened up, walking back behind my desk, my hand resting on its solid, wooden surface. The bell was going to ring soon. The spell was about to be broken. We did get out. Slowly, painfully, but surely. My mom eventually found a better-paying job as an office manager, and we saved every penny until we could afford the deposit and first month's rent on a small, cramped, one-bedroom apartment that, to us, felt like a palace. I went to college on a patchwork of academic scholarships, need-based grants, and a mountain of student loans that I'm still paying off. I became a teacher. And I kept my promise to Chloe. I've tried, every single day of my career, to make this classroom a sanctuary, like the art room was for me. A place where you can be yourselves, where your struggles are acknowledged and not dismissed, where you are safe, where you are seen. I met their gazes, one by one, trying to impress upon them the weight of this moment. But I never told that story to a class before. Not in all these 18 years of teaching. Until today. Because your laughter, it showed me that the divide between who I was and who you see is still too wide. The person I am now has effectively erased the person I was then. And maybe that's my fault for not bridging it sooner. For not trusting you with the truth of me. The bell rang then, its jarring, electronic buzz shattering the intimate silence we had built. The spell was broken. The students stirred, gabbing their books and backpacks slowly, quietly, as if moving too quickly would be disrespectful. They filed out, many of them pausing at the door to give me a small, apologetic smile or a quiet, heartfelt thank you, Ms. Evans, or a simple, see you tomorrow. Sarah lingered until the room was almost empty, shuffling her papers unnecessarily. Ms. Evans, she said, her voice small and thick with emotion. She finally looked up at me, her eyes glistening. I'm really, really sorry we laughed. We were ignorant jerks. I shook my head, offering her a gentle smile. No, Sarah, you weren't. You were human. It's incredibly difficult to imagine a reality that's so fundamentally different from the one you see and experience every day. It's the job of stories, and the people who tell them, to build that bridge. I should have started building it a long time ago. But thank you for saying that. She nodded, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. She gave me one last, shaky smile and left, closing the classroom door softly behind her. And then I was alone. The classroom, usually a space buzzing with residual energy after the final bell, felt profoundly still. The afternoon light slanted through the high windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the air. I sat at my desk, the adrenaline of my confession fading, leaving me feeling hollowed out, scraped clean, and yet, strangely, deeply peaceful. I had done it. I had unlocked the door and let the girl from the car, the girl with the desperate eyes and the fierce heart, step into my classroom. I had introduced her to my students. And they had not turned away. The next day passed quietly. The students were respectful, almost reverent. They listened more intently during discussions, they participated more thoughtfully, they offered insights with a new kind of depth. The story had become an unspoken presence in the room, a new layer of understanding that hummed just beneath the surface of our lessons on iambic pentameter and rhetorical analysis. They looked at me differently now. They saw the layers. But a small, nagging part of me wondered if the lesson had truly landed, or if it was just a moment of dramatic storytelling, a poignant interruption in the curriculum that would soon fade, overshadowed by the pressing concerns of college applications and prom dates. Then, on Friday, something entirely unexpected and magical happened. I was in the middle of a lesson on the rhetorical devices in Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, discussing the powerful rhythm of his anaphora, when there was a soft, tentative knock on my classroom door. I excused myself and opened it to find our school secretary, Brenda, standing there, a knowing, almost giddy smile on her face. "There's a visitor for you, Maya," she said, her eyes twinkling behind her cat-eye glasses. "She says she's an old friend." I told her you were in the middle of teaching, but she insisted it was a surprise, and that it was important. My mind raced, blank. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it, Brenda?" But Brenda just shook her head, her smile widening, and stepped aside. And there she was. Time had softened the wild, untamable curls into an elegant, silver-flecked mane that was somehow both artistic and sophisticated. The paint-stained jeans had been replaced with a chic, black linen tunic and trousers, an artist's uniform upgraded for a world of gallery openings and critical acclaim. But the eyes were exactly the same, bright, intelligent, fierce, and full of their old, familiar mischief. Chloe. And in her arms, she carried a large, flat, rectangular object carefully wrapped in plain brown paper and sealed with tape. My hand flew to my mouth. A gasp escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and joy. "Chloe?" "Hey, Maya," she said, her voice, that familiar, warm, gravelly tone I hadn't heard in person in over 3 years, washing over me like a wave of pure, potent nostalgia. "Sorry to barge in on the intellectual proceedings. I was in town for the gallery opening downtown, my first solo show, can you believe it, and I couldn't leave without seeing you. And," she added, her eyes flicking past me into the classroom, taking in the rows of staring, captivated students, your class. My students were watching, utterly mesmerized by this dramatic interruption. They saw the tears that immediately sprang to my eyes, the genuine, overwhelming joy that transformed my face. They saw the history that passed between Chloe and me in that single, silent look. "Class," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I turned to face them. This is my very dear, my oldest friend, Chloe. She's an incredibly talented artist, and it seems she's now a famous one, too." Chloe stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding the space, just as it always had. She had an energy that could quiet a room without her ever raising her voice. "Don't let her fool you," she said to the class with a wry, self-deprecating smile. "I'm just the sidekick. She's always been the brilliant one." She looked back at me, her expression softening. Brenda at the front desk was filling me in while I waited. "She said you've been telling stories." "Our story." I nodded, unable to form words, the lump in my throat too large. Chloe turned to fully face my students, her demeanor shifting from playful friend to serious artist, to witness. "So, Ms. Evans told you she was once homeless." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact laid bare on the table between them. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights, the rustle of a page turning, the distant sound of a locker slamming shut somewhere down the hall. "She lived in a car with her mother." "Did she also tell you that she used to do her calculus homework by the dim, orange glow of a sodium vapor street lamp because it saved the car battery? That she once used her last $5, money her mother had given her for lunch for a week, to buy a collection of Mary Oliver poetry instead of a meal, because she said she needed soul food more than she needed actual food? That she is, without a single doubt, the strongest and most resilient person I have ever had the privilege of knowing?" The students shook their heads, their eyes wide, hanging on her every word. "I was there," Chloe said, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, as if she were sharing a secret just with them. "I saw it. The shame she carried like a second skin. The constant, low-grade fear in her eyes. The way she would flinch when someone slammed a locker too hard. But I also saw her ferocious, unbreakable courage. Her mother was a hero, a titan of sacrifice and love, but Maya, she was a warrior. She fought for her future not with fists, but with words and willpower and an intellect that refused to be dimmed by her circumstances. When my family took them in, it wasn't charity. It was the smartest investment we ever made. We were investing in a future we all believed in." We were building a foundation, just like her mom said. We were just providing some of the tools and a safe place to build. She held up the large, wrapped object in her hands. I brought you all something. A visual aid. I've always been better with images than with words. She carefully, almost reverently, began to tear away the brown paper, the sound of ripping tape loud in the silent room. It was a painting. It was breathtaking. The canvas was large, about 3 feet by 4, and it was dominated by the intimate, claustrophobic interior of an old, boxy station wagon, viewed from the perspective of the back seat, as if the viewer were a silent passenger. Through the windshield, you could see the blurry, impressionistic lights of a sleeping city at night, smears of white and yellow and orange against a deep, indigo blue. In the front seats, the silhouettes of a woman and a teenage girl were visible. The mother's hands were on the steering wheel, her profile strong and weary in the shadows. But the focus, the brilliant, heartbreaking focus of the entire piece, was the girl. She was turned slightly away from the front, her face illuminated by the soft, golden, almost holy glow of the car's dome light, which was the only true source of light in the painting. She was reading a book, her brow furrowed in concentration, her eyes devouring the words on the page. One of her mother's hands had left the steering wheel and rested on her daughter's shoulder, a gesture of love, of solidarity, of shared purpose. The colors of the car's interior were deep blues, murky greens, and shadows, but the light from that dome lamp was a brilliant, concentrated splash of gold, illuminating the girl's face, the pages of the open book, the determined line of her mother's jaw. It was a painting of hardship, yes, of poverty and fear and the dead of night. But more than that, it was a painting of love. Of resilience. Of a fierce, unbreakable, luminous hope that could not be extinguished by the surrounding darkness. And in the bottom right corner, in Chloe's elegant script, the painting was titled, The Foundation. A collective, soft gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. They were seeing it. They were seeing me. Not the teacher at the front of the room, but the girl. They were seeing the truth of my story, rendered not in words, but in Chloe's beautiful, poignant, devastatingly accurate brushstrokes. It was one thing to hear about a car. It was another thing entirely to see it, to feel its cramped, dark reality, and to see the defiant light of hope burning at its center. Sarah had her hand over her mouth again, but this time, she was crying openly, silently. Jake had stopped doodling entirely, his pen forgotten, his eyes fixed on the canvas with an intensity one had never seen in him before. Every single student was transfixed. This, Chloe said softly, her own voice thick with the emotion of the moment, is what resilience looks like. This is what hope looks like. It's not always pretty or dramatic. It's often messy and scary, and it happens in the most unlikely, undignified of places. Even in a broken-down, rusted-out car on the edge of a supermarket parking lot. Your teacher didn't just survive that time. She used it. She let it forge her in fire, let it temper her like steel. She let it build her into the person who stands before you now. A person who understands, in her bones, that everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. A person who builds sanctuaries out of classrooms. A person whose foundation is so strong, she can now be a foundation for others. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears and pride. She is my oldest friend, and she will always be my greatest hero. The silence in the room that followed was profound. It was a living, breathing thing, filled with a new, deep, unshakable understanding. The laughter from Tuesday felt like a lifetime ago, a memory from a different era. It had been utterly erased, replaced by this powerful, silent, magnificent testament to a truth they could now not only hear, but see and feel in their very souls. Chloe stayed for the rest of the class period, propping the painting up on a chair at the front of the room. She answered their questions, about her art, about that time, about what it was like, about how my mother was doing now, thriving, I'm happy to say, and living in a sunny condo in Florida, with her characteristic blunt honesty and her wry, self-effacing humor. She filled in the gaps of my story with color and detail, painting a fuller picture of that difficult, transformative time. Then, with a final, tight, lingering hug for me that communicated more than words ever could, she was gone, leaving the painting leaning against my desk, a permanent, powerful new fixture in our classroom. The class period ended. No one moved. They just looked at the painting, and then at me, their expressions a complex mix of awe, respect, and a newfound sense of connection. Finally, Sarah stood up. She walked over to the painting and looked at it for a long, long time, her head tilted, taking in every brushstroke, every play of light and shadow. Then she turned to me. "Ms. Evans," she said, her voice clear and strong, no longer filled with laughter or apology, but with a mature, heartfelt respect. "Thank you. For the story. And for this, for letting us see. I don't think I'll ever forget it." One by one, they filed out, each of them pausing for a moment to look at the painting. It was like a pilgrimage. The last to leave was David, a quiet, introspective boy who rarely spoke in class, who usually communicated through his brilliantly written essays. He stopped at the door and looked back at me, his gaze steady and wise beyond his years. "You built your house, Ms. Evans," he said simply, with the profound clarity that sometimes comes from the quietest students. "Just like your mom said you would." And then I was alone again. I sat at my desk for a long, long time, just looking at Chloe's painting. The foundation. It was all there, the fear, the love, the struggle, the hope, the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter, the salvation offered by friendship. It was my past, but it was no longer a heavy stone in my pocket, a shameful secret to be carried in silence. It was a foundation. It was the very reason I was here, in this room, with these students. The laughter had been the key that unlocked the door, and Chloe, my old friend, my faithful witness, had been the one to swing it wide open, showing my students the real, the whole woman behind the teacher, the girl who had built a life, word by word, lesson by lesson, on a foundation of struggle and love and unwavering hope. My students laughed when I said I was once homeless. They couldn't see the girl in the car. They couldn't see the foundation being laid in the dark, with nothing but a mother's love and a dome light for tools. But now, because of an old friend and a painting titled with a promise, they can. They see her every day, hanging there on the wall, a constant reminder of where I've been, and by extension, a reminder to look more closely at the hidden battles of those around them. And that painful past has finally, fully, and completely, become my most powerful lesson. The past is not a chain that holds you down. It is the ground you build upon. And sometimes, the strongest, most beautiful foundations are poured in the darkest of nights, with hope as your only light.